Well, some breaking news now, relatively good news. New figures from the Office for National Statistics show that the number of deaths registered in England and Wales over 1 week has fallen below the 5-year average. That is for the first time since the week ending March the 13th. Well, Ed Conway, our economics editor, has been tracking these statistics throughout the outbreak. Ed.
It is good news, Adam, and it's been a long time since we've been able to say that. We've been tracking these data, showing you excess deaths, which is basically the most comprehensive measure of how many people have died across England and Wales and indeed the rest of the UK compared with the seasonal average. And as you know, it's been very high over the course of the last few months. But the good news is, for the first time since the onset of this pandemic, there are not excess deaths across the UK. And I say the UK because we can look across all of the UK. I've taken numbers for England and Wales, which we've just got this morning, but I've also added on figures for Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. They have a slightly positive territory excess deaths, so still more people dying than the historical average in Scotland and Northern Ireland, but it's very small at the moment. And if you take all of the UK, we are now down below this line. You will remember probably this line. This line shows you the average number of people who have died in the given weeks of the year. And you can see it tends to peak around the start of the year and then drops down through the year as it goes on. Let's have a look at what's happened so far this year. You can see 2020, a very big increase there, a spike in excess deaths. So you can see the number of people dying of all causes has been above the average, significantly above the average. But look at those lines on the far right-hand side. Those lines have finally converged. Now, that is good news. It is the first time that's happened since the beginning of this pandemic. As I say, that's for the UK as a whole. So I've taken England and Wales and also added Scotland and Northern Ireland. When you take all of that in total, there are 20 fewer deaths than the seasonal average in that latest week of the year. It's the 19th of June is the week that we're talking about. And if you look just at this period as a whole, because now we are, for the time being at least, and hopefully for good, at the end of this wave of excess deaths, we can start to kind of tot up the total death toll from this period. And you can see 65,000 total excess deaths. And of those, 54,000 of those are put down to COVID-19. So finally, some good news when it comes to mortality in the UK. We are at an end of that period of excess deaths across the UK.
And Ed, have you had a chance to look at the different trends in the different nations of the UK? I certainly saw one chart yesterday suggesting the infection rate is dropping much more quickly in Scotland than in England, for example.
Well, actually, excess deaths, which is probably the most kind of comprehensive measure when you kind of look, but obviously it is lagging, as you know. Excess deaths are actually in positive territory in Scotland and slightly positive territory in Northern Ireland. So in this last week, England, which hitherto had certainly had the highest mortality of any of the home nations, had actually fallen quite sharply. So excess deaths had dropped much more sharply in England than in Scotland and Northern Ireland. So that is reassuring in that England was the real hotspot for a period. It'll take some time, though, Adam, before we know what the final death toll is, because it may well be that this line, this black line that we've been focusing on an awful lot, may well be below that average line for some time. And so we won't really know how it washes out, what the ultimate death toll is. And that's why I think it's tempting to try to compare the UK with other countries around the world. And indeed, on almost every measure, the UK is one of the worst in the world. But getting a definitive sense of how the story here compares with other countries will take some time because we are still in the relatively early stages. But as I said, the good news is this terrible peak of excess deaths that we've been suffering from in this country for a long period has now finally finished, hopefully good for good. We don't know. We'll have to see what the next few weeks bring. But that really is a watershed moment in this pandemic.